The Fuhrer's Revenge. (1940) April. Hitler's apprehensions about the British intentions are not groundless. The English government refuses the American peace plan and instead sets Operation Wilfred up in collusion with the French. Decidedly disregarding the neutrality, the British think about placing mines in the Norwegian territorial waters in order to sever the German iron supply lines, thus forcing their freight ships to sail in high waters. This fact would make them an easy target for the British fleet. At the same time, a task force of 4 infantry battalions, codenamed R4, is ready to attack and take over the strategic Norwegian harbors with the ultimate goal of preventing any German landing. Thinking they still have time, and the Russian-Finnish War being over, the British War Cabinet adjourns Operation Wilfred, disregarding Churchill's strong objections. He thinks his government is leaving Norwegians and Swedes at the mercy of the Germans. On the 3rd, the Kriegsmarine issues the order for the first group of troop carriers to sail from Hamburg to Narvik. Disguised as coal freighters, 10 destroyers head up north, sailing at great speed the 800 miles leading to their objective. On the 5th, the British send a section of the fleet from Scapa Flow to place mines in Norwegian waters. While the Royal Navy ships are on their way to Norway, the Admiralty headquarters receives from the intelligence services some discrepant reports about German landings in the Norwegian coasts. The English military suspect the reports to be a German fake, for they don't think the Germans will risk a landing without previously taking control of waters surrounding the landing areas. In the early morning of the 8th, a second wave of German ships sails from several harbors to the coasts of Norway. Meanwhile, the English ships are planting mines. A strong gale makes it very difficult for the German ships to correctly steer their course to their objectives. However, in the early morning of the 9th, the Kriegsmarine destroyers have already landed 10,000 soldiers in strategic spots of the Norwegian coast. Some Royal Navy ships are engaged in battle with a section of the 107 German ships posted off the Norwegian coast. Before being forced to retreat, the British lose the destroyer HMS Glowworm. At the same time, the RAF planes try with hardly any success to check the German movements. The Kriegsmarine's skill in decoding the messages about the British naval maneuvers makes a failure of any attempt to stop the Nazi invasion. From the old fortresses of the Oslo Fjord, the Norwegian soldiers try to resist the invasion. They sink the cruiser Blucher with 1,500 men on board. But the Luftwaffe, the naval artillery, and the sabotages performed by Quisling's men quickly annihilate the weak Norwegian resistance. King Haakon and his government flee to the north of the country and settle in Hamar. On the same day, the Charge d'Affaires of the German embassy in Copenhagen delivers a note to the Danish government explaining the South Vestrubing plan. At dawn, Denmark has been invaded by 2 infantry and 1 armored divisions of the Fuhrer's army. The Nazi promises about respecting their neutrality were worthless. King Christian is left with no more than a possibility of issuing a protest. Conscious of the situation and at the Germans' request, the government and the king decide to collaborate, not making any resistance, in order to avoid useless losses. In return, Hitler allows the king to remain in charge. In Norway, the fight is still on. At 8 a.m., the Oslo airport of Fornebu falls to Nazi paratroopers. At noon, 1,500 German soldiers with a music band parade through the streets of the Norwegian capital. Trondheim and the 2 old fortresses protecting its harbor are taken over by German troops, helped by members of the Quisling's party. The Norwegians are in no condition to resist. In the early evening, von Falkenhorst sends a message to the Fuhrer. In compliance with your orders, Norway and Denmark have been taken over. Hitler responds, "Let a friend of the Reich such as Quisling settle his government in the city." A 1,000 planes and 107 ships of all kinds make up the combined German task force that has attained all its objectives in one single day. The Norwegian resistance under General Karl Otto Ruge has been sabotaged by the National Union Party's 5th columnists. Mastering the land and supported by the Nazi troops, they make a failure of any attempt for fighting the invasion. On the 13th, in a second naval clash off the coast of Narvik, the British sink 8 German destroyers. But the German occupation forces have strengthened their positions and are now taking over the rest of the country. On the 14th, under the fire of the Luftwaffe planes, 12,000 British, French, and Polish soldiers land in the fishing towns of Namsos and Andalsnes. Their aim is to recover Trondheim and Narvik. The attack on Trondheim is a failure due to the Allied troops' lack of training for fighting in frozen areas and to the persistent raids of the Luftwaffe. Hitler commands the 196th Division to move urgently from Oslo in order to support the troops protecting Trondheim. In spite of the uneven land and of the Norwegian resistance, the German march to the north is unstoppable. Hitler's new maneuvers on Western Europe forced the French and British soldiers to withdraw from the country. In a few days, Operation Alphabet is underway. Narvik Harbor's facilities are destroyed, and the Allied troops are back on their way to England. The officers advise the Norwegian government to seek peace talks with the Germans. On the 24th, Hitler discharges his old accomplice, Vidkun Quisling, and appoints Joseph Terboven, a member of the Nazi Party, as president of Norway. For the Norwegians, the word Quisling will remain in history as a synonym for traitor. May. The war momentum is unstoppable. At 51 years old, the cyclothymic Fuhrer, the world's most genial German in General Rommel's words, is ready to face new challenges. Irresolution reigns among the Allied governments, but also in the Third Reich's headquarters. Hitler and von Brauchitsch, commander-in-chief of the German army, are uncertain of their next step after the campaign in the North countries. The experience of World War I had made France and the Netherlands to settle their defense lines along expensive strings of strongholds. The French had built the Maginot Line, stretching along the French-German border. Then, along the Belgian border to the Atlantic, observation and defense posts were established. The Belgians themselves had built the fortress of Eben Emael, reaching the Albert Canal. After many meetings and months of pondering, the OKW submits to Hitler the Yellow Plan, the strategy for invading Western Europe. The essential basis of this military onslaught is World War I Schlieffen Plan. This is something the Allied governments know very well, thanks to their Secret Services reports. Some German officers agree with the Fuhrer in that the weakest spots of the Allied defense are in the Ardennes forest, just at the ending section of the Maginot Line, near the Luxembourg border. Hitler wants his troops to pierce into France through this area. But the Nazi leader and Brauchitsch are uncertain about which is to be the final drive. Generals Rundstedt and Manstein contend that the attack must follow their own plan, the Manstein Plan, supported by General Heinz Guderian's Blitzkrieg. Although being risky, it would certainly stagger the Allies. The plan was founded on an attack in the north by von Bock's Group B in order to lure the Allied troops to this area. At the same time, General Rundstedt's Group A, with its panzer divisions, would pierce through the Ardennes forest in an encircling maneuver. The units under Guderian would march onto the north coasts of France towards Calais in order to assault the Allied lines in the rear. The Fuhrer is so enthused by this idea that he makes it his own. On the 10th, at dawn, 136 German divisions strike into Belgium and the Netherlands. The German Army's Group A under von Rundstedt and von Bock's Group B are sent against fewer troops with poorer weapons. At the spearhead of the invasion, 2,500 planes of the Luftwaffe are destroying airfields and airplanes in the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. The airborne onslaughts of General Student, performed by 15,000 paratroopers, head the attack on The Hague and Rotterdam. Another group of soldiers, using gliders, takes over the Belgian bridges on the Albert Canal and focuses on the assault to the Ibn Amel fortress, protecting Liège. The German paratroopers take over the bridges in both countries to ensure the way for the armored divisions. The British and French are persuaded that the Germans will try to get to Paris from the north, as they did in World War I. For this reason, their armies, according to the Dial Plan, crossed the Belgian border in order to reach the River Dial and stop there the German advance. As expected, the 50 Panzer divisions under the brilliant Major Guderian take advantage of the Allied maneuver to speed forward through Luxembourg and the south of Belgium, soon reaching the north section of the Ardennes forest. Thus, they succeed in raising a huge barrier between the Allied troops in the north and those in the Maginot Line in the south. General Ritter's Group C hurries to the French line. In the first hours of the 13th, while the Allied motorized divisions are deep in Belgian land, the greatest gathering of German panzers ever seen crosses their Ardennes and the French border, reaching the river Meuse and seizing its bridges. The tanks have to slow down to wait for the infantry. 4 days have hardly elapsed since the beginning of the invasion. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's lack of push is a source of strong debates in the House of Commons. The situation asks for a coalition government, but the Labour members refuse, as long as the current Prime Minister remains in charge. Conservative and Labour members agreed to appoint Winston Churchill at the head of the new government. Although being responsible for the disaster at Gallipoli in the Great War and for the ill-fated landings in Norway, Winston Churchill takes also in charge the Defense Department. In his first announcement, Churchill declares to his cabinet, "I can only promise blood, sweat, and tears."
Underrating its tremendous difficulties.
The circumstances are compelling. All the English people's strength must be focused in standing up to the war situation. In order to fight the German power, the British must manufacture as much war material as the rest of Europe. But its resources are in Hitler's hands. Naive England must get ready to fight on its own soil. On the 14th, a local volunteer defense corps, the Home Guards, is enlisted, and soon it will reach 1 million members. Its mission is to support the army by gathering neighborhood defense groups, to look over the shelters, and to repair the damaged armaments to be used against the enemies. The Dutch resistance is unable to stop the German advance. The Queen and the government flee from The Hague to Great Britain aboard a British destroyer. Soon afterwards, Rotterdam is ruthlessly raided until on the 14th, the Dutch army surrenders. In Belgium, the Allied troops have been expelled from the Albert Canal line. On the French front, German soldiers and Gerderian panzers, with the help of the Luftwaffe, cross the Meuse near Sedan before the Allies are able to regroup. Thus, the Wehrmacht units leave behind from Hitler's most feared strategic spot in their march to France. The German bombers, as spearheads of the several assaults, keep crushing the Allied strongholds, thus making them retreat, therefore allowing the Rommel troops to settle bridgeheads in Dinant. Guderian's panzer divisions keep marching on at great speed. On the 15th, the British launched their first air raid on the Ruhr industrial estates, with poor success. On the 16th, Rommel and his soldiers are 55 miles deep in French land, still marching on towards Cambrai. In a lightning trip, Churchill goes to Paris to consider the situation with Prime Minister Reynaud and General Gamelin. It is essential for the Allied troops to stop the German advance in France. Churchill orders the British planes to attack the German troops and armored units at Sedan. But the artillery and the Nazi Air Force crush this RAF attempt. On the following day, Guderian's armored units turned to the northwest, reaching the River Oise, east of the St. Quentin. An armored division under young Brigadier Charles de Gaulle tries a counterattack towards Laon-Montcornet, but the Luftwaffe's Stukas thwart the attempt, forcing them to retreat. In the Belgian sector, General von Reichenau's troops take over Brussels, forcing the British soldiers to fall back towards the Channel coast. Cambrai, Arras, and Amiens are seized by the German tanks, leaving behind them in their march to the sea a large corridor splitting the Allied armies in the north from those in the south of France. Ten days after the invasion on May the 20th, the German journey to the sea comes to an end in Abbeville. General Guderian turns to Calais and Boulogne, from where the Allied troops are withdrawing towards Dunkirk. Both towns are quickly taken over by the Germans. Having thus ensured the French north coastline, Hitler orders his panzers to stop in Gravelines, 10 miles away from Dunkirk, where the Allied soldiers are gathering. Von Rundstedt accepts this order, as his troops are tired and undersupplied because of the speed of Rommel's and Guderian's onslaught. In a week, they had made almost 300 miles in French land. Facing 7 German armored divisions surrounding them from the east and the west, and with the ocean at their backs, over 300,000 Allied soldiers are cornered in the Dunkirk perimeter. The only way out is a swift withdrawal by sea. The British officers establish a defensive perimeter along the canals surrounding the town in which hard fights are taking place. Dunkirk resists agonizingly. It is a battle for the streets and for the very houses. Small groups of desperate and trapped men fight in a guerrilla war. The English government and its new Prime Minister, Churchill, are at a loss before Hitler's attitude. The huge German war machine can easily annihilate the Dunkirk pouch of Allied soldiers. However, it does not for the time being. So the British think Hitler will soon try to make a truce with them. The fact is that the Nazi leader regards the Allied troops withdrawing to the sea as a second-rate objective, since Göring has pledged that the Luftwaffe will check any attempt for an evacuation by sea. On the 24th, the Fuhrer makes a surprise visit to von Rundstedt headquarters. They both agree that the armored units must not get involved in Dunkirk in order to focus on seizing Paris. Hitler is sure that the war will be over in some weeks, and the English will be compelled to talk. 2 days later, the German Army intelligence services report that the British have taken advantage of this halt and are withdrawing the Allied soldiers. Hitler orders the Air Force and the armored units to attack in order to prevent the operation. Vice Admiral Ramsay has launched Operation Dynamo, while the British Fighter Command, under Sir Hugh Dowding, orders its planes to do their best to keep clear the Dunkirk airspace. English and German planes are involved in hard clashes, ending with the loss of 176 Nazi planes for 106 to the British. The defense perimeter, running along the Aa, Yser, and Scaper canals, protects the withdrawal of thousands of soldiers from the British Expeditionary Force and the French First Army, gathering along the 22 miles of the Great Dunkirk North Beach. They wait impatiently for the few boats that are to take them to the British ships in charge of the evacuation. The raids of the German Air Force send to the bottom 3 British destroyers, and 6 more are seriously damaged, thus obstructing Dunkirk's harbor. The Admiralty, frightened by the losses, orders all the Royal Navy ships to withdraw from the evacuation operation. Without them, Operation Dynamo would be impossible, and the Allied troops would be left to their fate in the face of the German power. The British War Cabinet reckons that 40,000 soldiers may still be saved. On the 28th, they received the news of the Belgian armies and King Leopold's surrender to Hitler. Churchill rejects the advice of those who suggest him a deal with Hitler.
All our allies,
He finishes a long speech to the Parliament by saying,
to our American friends and helpers, drawing
"If
ever
this island's history must come to an end,
the ocean.
let it be when the last one of us will be laying down, buried in his own blood."
Right, out of the depths of sorrow and of sacrifice.
After a long silence,
Again,
the chamber roared in applause. They would never surrender nor talk with Germany. They would fight to the end. The English people's reaction is not long to show. On the 29th, the strangest fleet in naval history crosses the channel. Pleasure yachts, fishing boats, tugboats, among many others, come into service to save the soldiers at Dunkirk. On the 31st, the best part of the soldiers waiting in the Dunkirk beaches has been carried to Great Britain's southern harbors by thousands of boats making return trips day and night. June. On the 1st, the German army is only 4 miles away from the soldiers still waiting on the beaches. However, the British boats keep carrying away the men. On the 2nd, at 11:30 p.m., the Allied forces of Dunkirk have been withdrawn. 300,000 men are still alive. Hermann Göring and his Luftwaffe have been unable to prevent the withdrawal. Thanks to the burning of the Dunkirk harbor, fuel tanks curtaining the sky with thick black smoke, and the heroic performance of the RAF pilots, the Allies get their first victory over the German Air Force. On the 4th, the German troops come into Dunkirk, taking 35,000 French soldiers still keeping their defense positions. Churchill is aware of the chance of an invasion of Great Britain and, referring to the United States, announces in Parliament,
and polluted, and whose
"We will never surrender.
children lie
We will fight on until the New World helps us."
under the Hitler yoke.
At the end of May, Roosevelt had started a $1 billion defense program. Hitler feels sure that the British will talk. France will pay the bill. And then we'll settle things with the Bolsheviks, he tells his general staff in a meeting at his Belgian headquarters. Then, he issues the orders for the final step of the attack that will lead him to the utter conquest of France. The 140 divisions performing Operation Red are split in 2 groups. Group B, under von Bock, launches an attack along the River Somme to the west of Paris, where he arrives on June the 9th. Group A, under von Rundstedt, runs along the River Moselle and the Maginot Line, trying to take over eastern Paris with its powerful tanks. On the 6th, the Paris defense lines established by General Maxime Weygand along the rivers Somme and Aisne have been crushed. Goebbels feels that victory is at hand and declares on the radio, "The Third Reich will take over France, and then we will quickly take charge of the Jews." Churchill thinks that the only chance is to stand by Great Britain, and he tells Roosevelt about it. On the 9th, he orders not to send any more planes to France and to start withdrawing British and French soldiers to England from the Channel harbors of Le Havre, Cherbourg, and Saint Valery. On the 10th, Mussolini declares war on France and Great Britain. The nefarious Italian dictator tries to take advantage of the French weakness to get hold of a portion of the country. At the same time, he orders his air force to start raiding the British island of Malta. The English reply with a naval bombing on the Italian posts in North Africa, and the French ships do the same with Genoa and Vado harbors. On the 11th, Churchill flies to France in an attempt to persuade the French government that Paris has to be preserved with all forces at hand. But Marshal Pétain refuses to let the Germans bring the French capital to ruins. On the 13th, Paris is declared an open city in order to avoid destruction. French forces retreat to the south, leaving the Maginot Line to the German Army's Group C. In the early hours of the 14th, the German armored vehicles get to the Place de la Concorde. The German officers settle their headquarters in the Hotel Crillon and place a huge flag with the swastika under the Arc de Triomphe. Hitler has fulfilled one of his greatest wishes, to take over Paris. At noon, General von Kluge's soldiers contrive a victory parade along the Champs-Élysées. Thousands of citizens flee from the city while the Allies launch Operation Ariel, designed for carrying to England the troops still remaining in the north of France. The German U-boats begin to operate against the transport ships and sink the Lancastria with 3,000 soldiers aboard. On the 15th, by Hitler's special order, the German soldiers seize Verdun. The French Prime Minister, Paul Reynaud, resigns, and Marshal Philippe Pétain, 84 years old, gets in charge. He immediately asks the Germans for an armistice. On the 21st, Hitler holds on to his chance for humiliating the French. At 3:30 p.m., the French mission is taken to Compiègne, where, in the same railroad car in which the Germans surrendered at the end of World War I, General Keitel reads the unquestionable conditions for the armistice. To show his contempt, Hitler steps out before the reading is through. According to this agreement, Germany will occupy 2/3 of France, leaving the south portion known as the France of Vichy under French rule. The French are also allowed to keep their colonies. The Fuhrer, in his first and only trip to Paris, visits Napoleon's grave. He says to his generals, "Let all Germany know that this is the happiest moment of my life." Then he orders to bring from Vienna the remains of the Duke of Reichstadt, son of Napoleon, to let them lay beside his father's. July. The German invasion of France has resulted in the puppet government of Vichy, to which Churchill gives no recognition. On the 3rd of July, the British Prime Minister orders 2 cruisers and an aircraft carrier to attack the French ships in the ports of Oran and Mers el Kebir in Algeria in order to prevent them from being used by the German fleet. On the 9th of the same month, the Italian and British fleets clash for the first time in the Battle of Punta Stilo, without serious losses. At the start of August, the British ships exert pressure on the Italian naval base in Sardinia. Hitler's ambitions are not finished with France. He has crushed one of the enemies of Germany, but in order to master all Europe, he still has to vanquish a traditionally harder one, Great Britain. The island has turned into a haven for refugees and exiles from the Nazi regime. General de Gaulle announces through the BBC that his country will be freed from the tyrant. Meanwhile, the French people muse over the old-timer Pétain, blaming the socialists for everything that happened and supporting the Nazis by establishing an anti-Semite dictatorship in the France of Vichy. The British have lost thousands of soldiers in the Battle of France, along with 960 planes and 1,200 pilots. But with the American help, they are determined to resist until the end. To die, but killing, as Churchill had suggested. Hitler meets Mussolini in Munich. This quick victory in Western Europe makes him believe that his armies are unconquerable. He shares with the Italian dictator his doubts about the invasion of Great Britain. He thinks now that General Karl Student may well have been right when he suggested to go for it in the Dunkirk chaotic situation. But both he and Goering had refused. Mussolini encourages him to seek a diplomatic solution. The Fuhrer thinks it's very doubtful, but at the same time he issues his guideline number 16 about the invasion of British territories. On the 19th, in a speech to the Reichstag, he tries to frighten the English government with a warning. Huge sufferings and misery are in store for Great Britain should they refuse my peace offerings. 3 days later, Churchill's answer just galls him. We will preserve our island at any cost. We never sought war.
Than we could ever have planned if we had not marched together through the fire.
Hitler has won the war on the continent when France surrenders. He does not wish a direct clash with England, and he feels sure that for the British, asking for an armistice is just a question of time. They have to be reasonable, he says to his general staff. The Nazi leader's hopes are grounded on the fact that the English are alone. On one hand, the American government is away from the war, behind its neutrality policy, and on the other hand, the Soviet Union's Foreign Affairs Secretary, a traditional German enemy, is congratulating Hitler over his crushing victory in France. The British are helpless in the front of the Third Reich's war power. Good sense suggests that their only way out is to look for a peace agreement with the Germans. But Hitler's surmises are chimerical.
Hitler declared his intention to...
We will preserve our island at any cost, promised Churchill, elated by the Dunkirk withdrawal.
And make up your mind what ought to be done. Things are going from...
The Prime Minister's unyielding attitude is in contrast with his country's small capacity for resistance. Most of the planes and armored cars had been lost in the Battle of France. The well-known fighting ability of the Royal Navy and the RAF worries the heads of the German General Staff. An argument arises between the three armies. One of the great German strategists, the Kriegsmarine's commander-in-chief, Erich Raeder, thinks that the Navy cannot reach England as successfully as in Norway. More than that, in his thought, the German Air Force power is not enough to cancel the British capability for rearmament. With these reasons, on May the 21st, he prevails upon a downhearted Fuhrer to stop the preliminary to the invasion of Great Britain, already underway. In spite of controlling all northern European coastlines, most of the Nazi generals support Raeder's idea that war against England should be left for 1942 and 1943. However, Hermann Göring thinks that the Luftwaffe's destruction ability is far too powerful for the British Air Force. Apart from some minor troubles in Dunkirk, they have never been defeated. Therefore, he thinks they can easily destroy the RAF. He induces Hitler to include Operation Sea Lion, devised by von Brauchitsch in the second stage, since the German Air Force will completely annihilate the RAF, thus clearing the way to General Student's paratroopers. These would establish bridgeheads in Dover, Folkestone, and other places in South England in order to greet without any mishap the German landing troops sent from Calais, Boulogne, Dunkirk, and Le Havre. While the Navy and the Army still talk about the possibility of an invasion, Göring begins to organize the three air fleets in charge of destroying the British planes, communication networks, and ships. The Luftflotte No. 2 under Field Marshal Kesselring from Brussels, and No. 3 under Marshal Sperrel from Paris amount to more than 2,000 planes. Almost 1,000 of them are fighters of the Messerschmitt 110 and 109 series. They carry 20mm guns. They will be in charge of escorting the bombers, acting autonomously from their Northern Europe airfields. The Luftflotte No. 5 under General Stumpf, posted in Norway and Denmark, will raid northern England, providing strategic support to these two fleets, attacking on the south. Meanwhile, the British fighters' command's planes patrol over the channel, protecting the ships sailing in the convoys. Luftwaffe's fighters and bombers under Colonel Johann Fink try to sink them. It's the first clash between Dornier 17 and Spitfires.